Hey YouTube, it's Chris. I'm with you here today to help you set up a PostgreSQL database locally on your Windows 10 machine. The purpose of this is to give you the tools you need to follow along with me as I take you through the fundamentals of SQL. For all of you macOS users out there, I do have a video for you as well. Please check the link in the description below for that. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more SQL related content.
Alright, so the first step that we're going to need to do in order to get PostgreSQL working on our local Windows 10 environment is to install PostgreSQL via the Windows subsystem for Linux for Windows 10. Now, if you don't have the Windows subsystem for Linux, or WSL for short, installed on your computer, that is no problem. All you have to do is go to the Microsoft Store and then search Ubuntu, like that. And from here, we can install the Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. This is a good version to have. So go ahead and install that if you haven't already. It's absolutely free. And after you install it, it will look something like this. You may have to set up a username and password. Make sure you remember the password as you run sudo commands. We're going to need it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install Ruby, and Ruby is going to allow us to optimize files and put them into the database at a later time. So let's type in sudo apt install Ruby. Except type it in correctly. Awesome, and to follow best practice, let's go ahead and update our installer. So we'll say sudo apt update. And depending on where you're at, it might take a little bit longer than that, but just play it out. And then the next thing we're going to do is install the PostgreSQL service. So I'm going to say sudo apt install postgresql -contrib. Type Y for yes, and that is going to install it for us. Now we can type in psql version to ensure that it worked, and it looks like we have it installed. So the next thing we want to do is make sure the psql service is running. So let's do sudo service postgresql status, and we can see that it's online. If it wasn't online, you can use this command, start, sudo service postgresql start, to spin up the database. And you may need to use that if you ever restart your computer and the service isn't running. Now, if you need to stop the service, you can also just type in stop, and that'll spin the database down. All right, great. So now we should have PostgreSQL installed successfully to Windows 10. Let's see if we can shell into that server by typing in sudo -u postgres, which is the admin default user, and then we'll say psql. And as you notice, the terminal changes into the Postgres terminal, and from here we can actually write SQL queries and execute them as the administrator. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a database and a user for this course that we're going to load the AdventureWorks data into in the next step. So we're going to type in create user student with password learn SQL. We're going to make that student a super user. Awesome. It looks like it created the role just fine. Let's create the database now. So we're going to type create database AdventureWorks with owner equal to student, giving student all the permissions it will need. Now, it's not best practice in a production environment to make a user like this super user, but since we're just doing this in a sandbox where you're going to be following along, I want to make sure you have all the sufficient permissions you need to perform all the functions that I'm going to be teaching you. So that created the database. Now the next step we're going to need to take is to load the actual data into the database itself. The database is up, it's running, but it's empty. So we'll do that in the next step. All right, so the next thing we're going to need to do is get the AdventureWorks datasets and load them into the database themselves. These datasets are located on a Git repository, so we're going to have to clone them using Git commands into our local system. So to exit out of the Postgres database, I'm going to press Control D as in dog. And let's go ahead and go into a working directory that we can access in the File Explorer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in change directory, and I'm going to go to the mount drive C, which is my C drive on my Windows system. I'm going to type in my username, which is POHEK for me. It'll be different for you. And then I'm going to go into my documents folder. Hang on, let's make sure. Okay, sorry, scratch that. So first thing you're going to have to do is say change directory and then this slash, and that'll take you to here. And then if you hit LS, you'll see the MNT option, which is your mounted drives. So now we can type in what I was typing before, which is CD, MNT, C, users, and then your username, and then documents. And that'll take you into your documents folder. And this is where I'm going to clone my repo. You can clone it somewhere else if you would like, but this is what I'm going to use. So now I'm going to type in sudo git clone https github.com lorint AdventureWorks for postgres.git. And I'll include links in the description below to this repository so you can easily access this link if you need to. All right, so we're going to go ahead and clone that. And if we list our directory, we see it there at the beginning. So let's go into that directory. Oops. Okay, so we have our install files here. I'm going to go ahead and clear the terminal. So the next thing we need to do is we need to prep those CSV files using Ruby, which is why we installed Ruby earlier. So I'm going to type ruby update csvs.rb. Oh, excuse me. Before we run that command, we need to actually get the CSVs into the repository. Now, those are going to be in a Git as well, and they are in a zip file. So I'll include a link to that zip file in the description below. And when you click on that link, your web browser will appear just like this, and it will ask where you want to save that zip file. I'm just going to save it in my downloads. I already have it here. I'll just overwrite it real quick. And then let's go to our downloads. And I already have WinRAR zip archive set up. If you have another tool to extract files from zip files, you can use that. But I'll just use WinRAR. WinRAR is free. Oops. As I say that, they're like, you need to buy it online. But it's free. And then we can come in here and we can select all of our CSV files. And we can say extract to. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that in our working directory. So I'm going to go to Documents and that AdventureWorks for Postgres folder, which we created through the git clone command. So if I hit OK, that should get them there. Let's go back to our terminal and try to rerun that ruby update csvs.rb command. So that gets it all ready. And now we can run this command to load them into our database. Okay, so psql-h localhost, since we're locally hosting the database, -p5432 is the default port, -u is the student user that we created, -f is accessing the install.sql file inside of the AdventureWorks for Postgres directory, and then we're putting this in the we're running this SQL against the AdventureWorks database that we created. Hit enter. It's going to ask for the student password, which is learn SQL, and it's going to copy all of that data for us. You can hit space to view the rest of the output, and you can put :Q as in quit to get out of there. Awesome. So the next step, now that we have our database spun up on Windows 10 and the data load into it, is to actually access it through an IDE. So in order to access the data in the database and write SQL queries, you will need to download an IDE. Now there's a lot of options out there. My personal favorite is PyCharm, but that is a paid IDE. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to use a free one so that you can follow along and so that I can make a recommendation to you. The one that I've chosen to use for this course, and again, this is totally personal preference, is that if there's one that you like better, you're welcome to use it. But I chose Beekeeper. And Beekeeper is free for Windows 10 and Mac OS X. So let's go ahead and close out our terminal. And I'm going to open up Beekeeper. I will include a link in the description to take you to their download page. And when you open Beekeeper, let me delete this save connection. It will look something like this. And it's really, really simple to use. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Make sure you can see it really well. And under connection type, I'm going to select Postgres. And that will pre-fill our host and port with the default values. We're going to leave those as is. For user, let's put student, the user that we created, as well as a password of learn SQL. And for our default database, we're going to put AdventureWorks for the database that we created. Let's go ahead and test that connection. Looks like we have success there. I'm going to save this connection so that I can just easily access it every time I open Beekeeper Studio by typing in AdventureWorks DB. And I'm going to hit save. Awesome. Let's go ahead and connect. And to ensure that we are connected to the database, there is data for us to query and practice with. Let's type in select star from human resources .employee. Go ahead and run that. And as you can see, we have 290 rows that resulted in that query. So we do have a database up and running on our Windows 10 local instance. And it is full of AdventureWorks data. And so this is exactly what you will need to follow along with me in the Fundamentals of SQL course that I'll be putting out here on YouTube. Thanks for listening.